that's how I know you, right? When I was making my first feature with Jessamine Ansari, Lee Field's Faithful Man, I think we went to a live in-person in New York City talk that you were giving on crowdfunding. This is like way
a long time ago.
Yeah. We were basically like shooting on a shoestring budget for years and really like needed to finish the film and needed funds to be able to do that. And so we hired you to guide us through our first ever crowdfunding campaign.
I think the future of filmmaking, particularly in the independent space, really going to be focused on authenticity and audience. Really knowing your own story. Then being able to articulate that in a way that it connects to an audience.
So it sounds like you started your company really to be able to make your own work. Mm-hmm. And so how is that going now? What are you working on now?
Yeah, so I've got my first like multi-million dollar, it's $2.5 million budget indie feature that I'm supposed to be directing. Scheduled for April. When the plane tickets are purchased is when I'll officially be there. But like, the team's awesome, and so like I'm excited about that. And and then what kind of happened with when I first made my first films, I crowdfunded for them. Mm-hmm. And I raised like $100,000 for these 2 short films. Mm-hmm. And that's what sort of started another career path, which was that people started reaching out for help with their campaign. And what started is like coffee sessions with friends at the Republic of Pie in North Hollywood turned into me being the #1 guy who does crowdfunding.
First of all, a couple of the myths that come up around crowdfunding, because I talk to a lot of indie filmmakers who are trying to finance their films one way or another. Mm-hmm. And when the subject of crowdfunding comes up, most filmmakers like freak out. They're like, I don't want to do that. That's hard. It doesn't work. Or I don't have any friends who have money to give me. All these kinds of things that come up. And in my experience, crowdfunding has been the vehicle for myself and so many other filmmakers that I've worked with to put their project on the map, to get the development funds that they need, basically, to then be able to raise more significant financing for the film and get it made. So that's what I want to talk about, is how we do that. Right? How does that work? And maybe we could start by addressing some of those fears that people have around crowdfunding. And I'm sure you could say a lot more about that.
Yeah. So one thing that I would say is that like these fears are not unfounded in a sense. So what I mostly hear is people's concern about ruining their network in some capacity, bugging them, alienating them, embarrassing themselves through either bugging and alienating them or by having an unsuccessful campaign. And so there's this fear around these relationships. And like, that's 100% normal because we are social animals and we are in an industry that is so dependent on the health of our relationships that like anything that threatens that, we're going to have a primal response to it on a basic human level. And like a considerate professional response, right? The myth about it is essentially the idea that that's what crowdfunding has to be. Crowdfunding has to be this begging your friends and family to give you a donation, like a handout, right? We've seen so many bad campaigns, right? As filmmakers, we've been on the receiving end of such crappy campaigning that it's no wonder that we're like, oh my gosh, is that what I have to do? Do I have to send like blind carbon copy? Hey friends, skip your latte and give me $5. Right. Oh my God, please, desperation, right? So right out of the gate, one thing that I really focus on with clients, without getting too deep into it, is really flipping the messaging so that this isn't begging your friends and family. It's creating awareness around something that's going on in your life in a way that is relationship centric. So like a lot of my messages will end with like, look, whether you give or not, I don't ultimately care. This is a great excuse for us to reconnect. It's kind of been forever. So give or not, I'd love to know what's going on in your life. And when you do that authentically, people respond and they send you emails, right?
I have to say, the first time that we did the first Kickstarter that we did, what you said about tone really stuck with me, right? That the tone of desperation and please give me your money and all of that is a death sentence for a campaign, and that we actually had to hold the belief, right? However much we had to just like decide to hold the belief that this was something of value, this was something exciting that people were going to be excited about, and to write our emails and our outreach from that place. Number one. But number two, what you're saying is so true. I reconnected with people that I hadn't talked to in 10 or 20 years when we first did our Kickstarter campaign. My inbox was full of congratulations, excitement. Oh my God, it's so great to see what you're doing. So many things came out of that reconnection that didn't even have to do with the film, but also that supported the film, that really like reminded me of what community is all about.
There's so much that goes into that, as you know, right? There's so much that goes into that. And that can feel daunting, but that's a big part of my job. Is I'd say half my job is like, here's what you're going to do. And then the other half is like almost like the mental health support. That's like really breaking down these beliefs that somehow you are a stain on this world that is just sucking up everybody else's energy, right, as opposed to presenting what it is going on in your life in such a way that the people who are interested will come in and support, and the ones who aren't won't, and everybody's okay. Like your feelings aren't hurt. You know what I always say, like your best friend's going to give you $25 on the final day of the campaign, and some random ass high school person is going to be the one that gives you that $1,000 associate producer credit or something week 3 when nobody else cares, right? Like we have such a, and again, understandable where it's coming from, but I think like good therapy, it's like you can recognize like, oh, this triggers because I'm worried about like destroying this network. But the reality of it is that there's a way for me to do this, that this becomes so engaging and creates reconnection. And I've seen jobs come out of it. You know, oh man, I didn't know you were still doing that. You know, I'm making a film next weekend. I could use a, you know, whatever. Investors come out of it. Like, and I know we'll transition into this too, but like opportunities come out of this because a well-run, well-executed crowdfunding campaign is the best pitch deck ever. It not only has all those visuals and all this stuff that you would have, but it's the filmmaker succinctly articulating their vision, showing that there's an audience, that they know how to reach that audience, that audience is monetizable. Like all of these things work so well as a proof of concept, and you know, for executives, for investors, and all that stuff. Yeah,
you know, it's so funny because I'm always telling the filmmakers that I work with, you know, start with what you have access to. And sometimes what we have access to is literally just our community, right? And so if we were to start there and say, okay, how can I leverage this to get me to the next step in making that film? This is what that is, right? This is basically saying, okay, I can't get to Netflix right now. I can't get to that executive at Paramount Plus or whatever it is, but I can take this one step that is going to bring in the resources that I need. Also, what I found was that it put the project on the map in a way that then gave it a certain amount of credibility, legitimacy, and momentum, that then we could use that to get to the next step of like, okay, now how are we going to fund the edit? Or now how are we going to get our finishing funds or get our distribution connections or things like that?
Yep. That's what is so impressive to people. That's what, I mean, my business for half of the time was just pure referrals, because it was like, oh my gosh, this wasn't a horrible hellscape of an experience. This was kind of amazing. Connected me to a bunch of people and got me a bunch of opportunities.
Yeah, that's so important. And I think that when I talk to filmmakers, there's also this fear of like, that it's not going to work is the other fear that I get most often, right? And so I think it's important to note that you have a methodology that's proven, right? That's very systematic, that takes away all the guessing from the process. And so that's a big part of it as well. But the other thing that I bump up against, and maybe we can talk about this as well, is if you have a film that even has a couple $100,000 budget, right? Talking like really low budget, or a couple $1 million, right? The thing that I hear most often is, well, crowdfunding's not going to work for this. And in my experience, that's not actually true. again, because I think so much about leverage. And when you think of it as a lever to pull, right, to leverage you towards the next opportunity, it absolutely does work. And so I'm curious to hear, when you come up against that, even somebody that's coming to you that has a budget that's a couple $1,000,000, how do you look at the crowdfunding in that context?
I'll start by saying that like 6-figure crowdfunding campaigns, and I've had maybe a dozen or so, are rare, very rare, and they're getting less and less. I sat down with the former head of film at Kickstarter right before she left, and she was like, I used to be able to get on there at any time and find successful 6-figure campaigns, and now it's like once a month. Mm-hmm. So like people will reach out saying, hey, I have a couple $100,000 film, or I have $100,000 film, or I have, multi-millions, and I want to do it. And I kind of talk them through the whys of all that. That being said, that brings us then to the question, which is like, okay, well then does crowdfunding even have a place here? It's like, oh my God, yes. So investors generally invest in things or people that they know, like, and trust.
Same in business.
Same in business, right? This is, and I won't get into whole like nepotism and all that kind of stuff. At the end of the day, this is a relationship business. Money is an expression of our values. I'm not religious at all, but I do actually like that verse or something that's like, you show me your treasure and I'll show you where your heart is, or something like that, right? Like our money is a way to tokenize our values, the things that we find valuable. Food, rent, and movies and people and projects and ideas and entrepreneur, right? What crowdfunding does is it allows people to, particularly investors or decision makers, to get to know you, get to know your vision, to see you in your element and sort of expressing your idea in a way that is very multidimensional. It's not a PDF, right? It's still got all the images and all that kind of stuff, but it's got you talking. It's got a social media campaign connected to it. There's an expression of you as the artist there, combined with some proof that there is an audience and monetization and a viable concept that people are willing to step up and pay money for this. So if I'm an investor, this is such a prime opportunity for me to get to know somebody, that whole know and like and trust thing, because I'm kind of seeing it all play out in front of me before we even have our first meeting. And it speaks to like business skills, marketing skills, right? Independent filmmakers, we are entrepreneurs. And I totally know people are hearing that and being like, fuck. But I encourage you to figure out how to embrace it. That doesn't mean you have to be like a Gary V hustle culture, and I love Gary V, but like you don't have to be the ones we see on TikTok kind of all up in our business as an entrepreneur.
Right.
It just means that you are somebody who is ultimately has a lot more control over the destiny of your life and your project than I think we give ourselves a lot of credit for. It was lovely in the studio days where we could be like, cool, give me $1 million, take my thing, go make it, and woo, doesn't exist anymore. So now we get to have a lot more say in how we make it. I think crowdfunding is such a perfect step into that. You could raise $50K and that's a 10% minimum guarantee against a $500,000 film. Nobody gives MGs anymore. Wouldn't it be great if you could walk into an investor meeting, you've got cash in hand? I know I'm ranting. One more thing. Nobody likes to be first money in either, right? Investors, everybody's waiting for somebody else to get money in there as like the proof, right? That there's some viability here. Cool. You show up at a meeting with $50K already secured from an audience willing to pay a premium based on a vision that you've articulated so well that they're willing to give you $100 for something that at worst is going to be $15 in a theater, if you get a theatrical release, probably more like free online at some point. That speaks volumes to executives, to investors, to decision makers who are bombarded with options. What's a great filter? Oh, somebody who knows what the hell is going on.
Yeah, in our experience, it forced us to articulate the story around the story, right? The story around the film in a way that we never really had to before we did our Kickstarter campaign. And in that articulation, we identified who cares about this movie, right? And we were making a film about a soul singer who had a very loyal and very passionate fan base already. And we didn't quite realize that until we had to think about it in terms of who's going to support the Kickstarter campaign. So we had to articulate that, right? Who is this movie for? Why are we making it? Why now? Why is it urgent? All of the things that go into a powerful pitch. Just the pressure of having to do that for the campaign dialed that in for us so powerfully in a way that then served us going forward in real meetings, right? We did end up in that meeting with Paramount Plus, and by then we were able to really articulate who the audience is, what the marketability of the film is, and show that proof of concept that there was actually interest behind this film.
You're not just some wide-eyed filmmaker showing up with a script. Most of my testimonial videos aren't, we raised our money, you should hire Justin, we raised our money. They're almost all like, this kind of changed my life. Like this sort of shifted the way I think about engaging with an audience, building an audience, talking about my film. Nobody wants to hear your plot. We've all been at Q&As where somebody stands up and is like, I have a movie where this thing happens and then this happens, right? But like learning how to articulate, like, I'm making this because here's why. Here's that thing that's firing me up to get there. And then the investor or executive is sitting there being like, ooh, I feel that, I'm feeling that, right? It's a vibe. It's like a first date, right? It's like a whole vibe check.
Right.
You don't show up on dates, start listing, well, I'm excellent in bed, I make six figures, it's like, you don't do that. I mean, you show up and you like get passionate about the thing you're passionate about, and hopefully the person on the other side of it, at the very least, can at least like respect your passion. But sometimes they're like, oh my God, this is my kind of weird. This is my kind of, you know what I mean? And then that's who jumps on board.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's so helpful to hear that, I think, also because at the end of the day, finding the investors for a film is also about relationship building, like full stop. That's what it is. Nobody's giving you money if that relationship is not there. And so these are skills that serve a filmmaker. By the way, so is directing a film, all about relationship building. So is producing, right? So is like acting, like all of it. Yeah. 100%.
I mean, acting is like listening. It's communication. It's the most relational. Every good actor will tell you, it's not acting, it's reacting. It's listening. Meisner training where you're doing repetitions of just like hearing what they're saying and listening and repeating and like the irony for me again is like the people who are the most worried about relationships and human beings somehow being sort of negatively affected by their art are the ones who are in a unique position of understanding the power of art being a thing that brings people together, that unites, that unites and binds people. And so like that passion, there's a way for you to be you and for that to then be translated into an expression, other people's expression of their valuation of that, a.k.a. money.
It's so interesting because as you're saying that, I'm thinking about where the industry is at these days and how many people are bumping up against what feels like a dwindling amount of opportunities, a dwindling amount of resources, right? A lot of my peers in the TV industry specifically are really struggling where they used to have a booming freelance business in the TV industry that now is very volatile and not so reliable. And there's something about crowdfunding specifically that really democratizes our access to those resources, right? Like the name of your company, Greenlight Yourself, right? There's something about that says you don't actually need that trickle down. You don't need to be approved or let in by the industry. But actually, this is a democratic process, right? And so I'm curious, when we think about the possibility that the ways that films have traditionally been funded or picked up, commissioned by a network or something like that, and here's your multi-million-dollar budget and go make the thing, right? Or the acquisitions that come with that hefty minimum guarantee, as those are dwindling, how does this fit into maybe a future model of what it looks like to make independent films?
I think the future of filmmaking, particularly in the independent space, really going to be focused on authenticity and audience. Really knowing your own story so much, and knowing, like, as a human, and then also, of course, knowing your project. Then being able to articulate that in a way that it connects to an audience, even if that audience is the distributor company, or a pitch that you're in that somebody can help finish it or something, or it's a larger scale audience. And I think it's going to start being a larger scale audience. I could cite a couple of anecdotes, but there's films that like got funded from large newsletters. I mean, multi-million from thinking of this military company that like had their database of like military clothing sales, I think, and then they made a military movie. And like that was it. And then they like got $10 million from their people. Like they owned it all, everything, right? By the way, much more profitable than most studio projects.
Yeah.
Like a ton. So like I absolutely think any filmmaker now should be on LinkedIn, A, and B, really needs to start embracing, I'll say it in this way, kind of stop resisting the idea that they have to be an entrepreneur, and start trying to reframe it as an opportunity for freedom and power. That's why entrepreneurs are entrepreneurs, by the way, because they don't like working for other people. They like being in control of their lives and shit, right? So you just got to find your people. And the best way to do that is to be yourself so fully that other people come along. And that's going to include business people. And that's all entrepreneurship really is at the end of the day. I have a vision, a dream, a product, a goal, and I'm going to dedicate myself to it until I find other people who are interested in it as well. And that is a film. That is a film.
It's so funny because I think that getting over, this was true for me as an entrepreneur, right? In order to really be able to have a sustainable business, I had to be willing to be seen, and be seen on a much bigger scale. I was coming from a long career of being behind the camera, right? And so being willing to be seen, being willing to put my voice out there, to be willing to stand for what it is that I was creating, all of that was the gateway that I had to walk through, right? And it was tremendously rewarding, just like the crowdfunding campaign, right? Same experience. Once I started to do that, the response was fantastic. The response was heartwarming. The response was my people coming to me and me finding the people that I could actually serve and help. And so, as you say that, I'm thinking of how we do right now have access to be able to get our message out and connect with our people, right? In a way that's free, that's fully accessible, and that helps us to build a quite large global community around anything if we have the right messaging, and if our authenticity and passion is behind it. Yeah, I hope that this conversation helps people to really see that they can take the reins of their careers, of their films specifically, and that there's always a path to get something financed, right? And that crowdfunding, even with all the anxieties that come with it and come with the idea of starting it, is actually a viable, accessible, and really, really, in many ways, deeply rewarding way to get your film financed, or to at least get the development funds that you need to then get the fully financed. And that authenticity is not just allowed to be part of it, but is necessary for the process to really be a success. So hopefully that's encouraging for people. Maybe let's end on thinking again about that filmmaker that really this podcast is for, that's sitting there with their finished script, or, their documentary subject who's ready to be filmed, and they're just trying to bridge the gap between where they are to actually getting the funding to make it happen. What's the takeaway that you have for them?
General and then specific. General is every day try to take one tiny step. It can be a minute of you looking up potential investors, or a minute of getting onto IMDb Pro and looking up similar comped films or something. Like, don't wait. Do something small. The next thing that is a mix of general and specific is developing relationships. This is a relationship-based industry. I have 2 programs that talk about that. Decision Maker Meetings is one. You can go to decisionmakermeetings.com, and then crowdfunding. But like learning how to find and connect with with people in this industry without the need for anything from them. You know, setting up general meetings, finding mentors, advisory boards. Crowdfunding is a really great way as you're developing relationship to really massively move your project forward.
I think for me, the thing I'll add is to really get in touch with that why. Like, why this? Why now? Why you? Right? Those classic questions, because that is the rocket fuel, right, for ourselves, and then for everybody else to connect with that. And that was certainly true in my experience working with you, Justin. So thank you so much. What's something that you're excited about that you've got available that people can check out more about what you do? What do you want to share?
Yeah, well, I got the film coming up, but there's nothing really about that yet. Yeah, if anybody wants specifically help with like relationship building, that's my program, Decision Maker Meetings. So decisionmakermeetings.com. Ooh, and if you email me, I'll give you a discount code, like a 50% off lifetime one. It's like a monthly subscription thing. And then yeah, crowdfunding. You know, if anybody wants help with that, we'll put a link. You know, the Kickstarterguy.com is a place to start, but we'll put in some specific links. And then I've got a free masterclass on, I think it's indiefilmcrowdfunding.com, but I'm also trying to get it on my main site. So we'll put that into. You know.
Yeah, we'll share that resource as well. And I should say also, Justin, I am so committed to the work that you do and having your guidance that you work with my clients now as well, right? If they're going to do a crowdfunding, then my first move is we call Justin.
Yeah. We
don't do it without him. I don't mess around with that kind of thing. Justin, it's always a pleasure to chat with you. Thank you so much for all the valuable information here. And I look forward to seeing what happens with your movie coming up.
Yeah.
Love it.
Thank you.
All right, we'll see you all soon. Bye.
Bye, everyone.